Hello, I'm Chris Fowler, and welcome to Sports Century. Some of the most epic confrontations of the Cold War took place on the playing fields of the world. One of the most memorable was the gold medal basketball game between the United States and the Soviet Union at the 1972 Summer Games. In the early hours of September 10th in Munich, America's Olympic winning streak of 63 games and 7 gold medals came to a crashing and controversial end. It all revolved around 3 seconds. That sliver of time has lived on and on. But as we'll see over the next half hour, the genesis of that defeat began much earlier.
Follow! The United States wins it 50-49.
There's 2 legacies to the game. Number 1 is the United States got screwed and deserved to win the game.
Now we're being told the scoreboard is not correct.
Number 2 is the rest of the world was caught up.
Alexander Belloc!
It's insulting that we lost our game to them, but you know, where we played that day, we didn't really deserve to win.
We had a tremendous guilt feeling after that number 1, we didn't send our best team, that we didn't have the right coach, and that maybe it was our own fault we got nailed.
This was the first time that America really realized the fact that the rest of the world was playing basketball and playing basketball at very high levels.
The Soviets were doing everything to advance their form of government through athletics, and they felt like that if the other countries saw what they were doing in sports, then they'd want to be a part of that communist system.
There were 2 or 3 basketball coaches attached to the embassy in Washington. They were there specifically to have profiles of all the leading basketball players.
The Russians decided when they wanted to teach the jump shot, Jerry West became the prototype of this is the way you shoot the jumper. They copied it well.
The Soviet team basically was a professional group. It was comprised of Red Army athletes, and they were together on a year-round basis.
They had a great team. Their team, it's reported, had played almost 400 games together. 400 games. We had played 12 exhibition games and the trials.
In contrast to the Soviet state-run pseudo-professional system, amateur basketball in the U.S. was riddled with pettiness and political infighting.
We were losing track of what was important, really putting our best players on the court and winning world competitions.
There was a growing sentiment that the Amateur Athletic Union, long the governing body of the sport, had outlived its usefulness with the growth of professional basketball.
The AAU was running out of good players. It was time for them to really give up the control of the Olympic program, but they just didn't want to do it.
Yeah, there was a war. Coming from the collegiate community, we thought, honestly, that we could do a better job representing basketball from the United States of America into the world.
We had wanted John Wooden or Dean Smith as our candidate for the Olympic coach. The AAU folks wanted Adolph Rupp, who was ill.
The AAU was just scared to death that the NC2A would get somebody in there that would hurt the AAU's chance. And they knew IVA wouldn't do that. IVA would pick some AAU players.
68-year-old retired coaching legend Henry Iba was the compromise choice to lead the 1972 Olympic team. He had guided the U.S. to gold medals in the 1964 and 68 games, and Oklahoma A&M to 2 NCAA championships in the 1940s.
They knew what they were getting when they picked Coach Iba. They weren't picking a guy who's going to go out there and press and run and play basketball the way American basketball was being played at that time.
Everybody felt that his defense, his knowledge of the game, and the fact that he was a proven winner on every level for 40 years was enough.
And he got a lot of undue criticism. How the hell do they know? Their critics had never ever scaled the heights that he had.
The American team was not only without the Wizard of Westwood as its coach, but the center for John Wooden's UCLA powerhouse elected to skip the Olympics. Bill Walton, the College Player of the Year, declined the invitation, in part due to a distasteful experience at the World Championships 2 years earlier.
For the first time in my life, I was exposed to negative coaching and the berating of players and the foul language and threatening people who didn't perform.
He wasn't the most patriotic guy going. He laid down on the San Diego freeway to protest the Vietnam War. I don't think that he would have wrapped himself in the flag.
That had nothing to do with it. Bill was against the Vietnam War. but very much against it. But Bill was for America.
The doctor had advised him between seasons to really not play. Before every practice, he soaked his knees for a half hour, and he packed them with ice for a half hour after every practice.
Bill did not want to try out. I mean, he would have played in the games, but he didn't want to try out. Hank Eibel was adamant that if you were going to be on the team, you would go through the process like everybody else.
He was the best player of our time, and the fact that he was not at the camp caused a good deal of concern, because if he plays, all of this becomes academic.
We were told we were going to Hawaii to train. So I had visions of hula girls and palm trees and beaches, and I joined the Navy.
They put us on Pearl Harbor Naval Base. The guards around the perimeter were instructed not to let us off. They caught us leaving, they called Coach Iba. They caught you leaving the second time, and you were automatically off the team.
We adopted the life of soldiers, which meant reveille at 6:30, practices 3 times a day, eating in the mess hall.
It was the toughest 21 days of my life.
One player who was unable to adjust to Coach Hank Iba's stern and unbending approach to training camp was Swen Nader, Walton's backup at UCLA. Nader said he lost 20 pounds.
I finally went over and said, "It's not working, look at me. Can you do anything?" "No, we can't do anything." I said, "Well, I'm gonna have to leave." They said, "We'll get your plane ticket ready."
Our feeling of Swen was that if he don't want to pay the price, then go on home. Because we all felt it was an honor to be there.
We were all greatly disappointed because of the big guys. He's the one guy that could really shoot the ball. Swen Nader had a special offensive talent.
I'm worried about the youth, and I'm worried about the experience they've had in international ball. I don't think that they'll beat us, we'll beat ourselves if we lose.
Despite Iba's concerns, the youngest American Olympic team won its first 7 games in Munich by an average of 33 points. Then, on September 5th, came the unspeakable.
The peace of what has been called the Serene Olympics was shattered just before dawn this morning, about 5 o'clock, when Arab terrorists went to the headquarters of the Israeli team and immediately killed one man. They've been holding others hostage since then, and the latest report is that one more has been killed.
We've been through months and months of hell, and then we found out what hell was really like.
A German soldier came up to me and he says, "Stand next to the wall. The Palestinians are getting ready to bring out the Israeli hostages." As the Israelis moved behind me, I could hear the whimpering and the shuffling of the feet. The German brought the gun from my back up to the back of my head, and he held it there. And at that point in time, I'm pretty sure I closed my eyes and just said a prayer for myself. And I really should have been saying a prayer for them.
Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They have now said that there were 11 hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms. 9 were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone.
We were saying, could this really happen? I mean, here we are for sport, and we see death and tragedy.
I wondered in my mind, why are we still here? Why are we even playing a game when this has taken place?
34 hours after suspending competition, IOC President Avery Brundage ordered the games resumed. The U.S. crushed Italy by 30 to advance to the final, which began near midnight on September 9th to accommodate American television. The Soviets promptly took a 7-1 lead, and the deliberate pace of play frustrated the Americans.
Iba's conservative nature came to full flower in that game. There's some real athletes on that team who just made their blood boil.
You have guys that like to run the ball up down the floor, and then we come back and run the offense, and you pass the ball 6, 7, 8 times before you get a shot off. And I think that's the thing that threw us off more than anything else.
We played into their game, the slowdown game. That's their game. We should have ran. We'd have ran them back to Russia.
We were playing World War I tactics in a World War II campaign.
There's no reason to suspect that that system wasn't going to work in this game. Unfortunately, the Americans were surprised by a team that was probably better than they ever counted on it being.
I didn't realize how good Sergei Belov, the guard, was. And he dominated that half. We couldn't force him into bad shots. It was his ball game and his ball. And we weren't ready for it.
Sergei Belov fired 10 consecutive points for the Soviets, who led at the half 26-21. Struggling to cope with the physical play, the Americans trailed by 6 with 12 minutes left, and then lost their leading scorer.
Dwight Jones, tempers flare.
I get a rebound and this guy comes down with his elbow in the back of my head. And I dropped the ball and turned around like I was gonna hit him, and the referee threw both of us out the game.
They knew Dwight had a temperament that, they could get him rattled, and that was their purpose, and they got him out, and then once they got Brewer out, those were our two biggest bruises.
Belov, 14 of Russia, 11 of Brewer. And Brewer has been shaken up, and he is really our other big man, our other big rebounder.
I fell backwards, hit my head on the floor. I remember playing for maybe another possession or two, and then all of a sudden there was a play call, and I couldn't quite remember what that play call was.
Brewer suffered a slight concussion and had to leave the game with 5 minutes remaining. With time short and its deficit sizable, the U.S. chances for a comeback looked grim.
We decided to take matters into our own hands and let's play the way we think we should play. We started gambling for balls, turning up the heat on these guys. This wasn't a coaching decision. This was a player's decision.
With their front court diminished and trailing by 8 points with 5 minutes left, the Americans began playing the hurry-up style for which they had yearned all along.
We had to get going. We had to press. We had to move it up and get running.
We're starting to come back, and I could see the fear in their eyes. And the question was going to be, will we have enough time?
Kevin Joyce brings it up. And he hits. 44-42.
We were standing there shaking. Are we really beating the Americans? Can we really do this? That's when we froze up and began to tighten up and lose it.
I was 100% sure that we're going to win this thing, that these guys are about to fold up the tent and go home, and we're going to take them.
Jim Forbes, Texas at El Paso. Inside 40 seconds, the U.S. down by 1.
Coach Ives told me the Russians would do something foolish and give us a chance to win, and I saw it right before my eyes.
Shot blocked by McMillan, but the Russians recover, now intercepted. 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Doug Collins goes into the basket support.
They just absolutely clobber him, and the only thing you see when he's down there was his body because his head was underneath the mat.
3 seconds on the clock.
I remember Coach Haskins and Coach Bach saying to Coach Iba, we got to get somebody to shoot these free throws. And I remember Coach Iba saying, if Doug can walk, he's shooting.
This place goes insane. Doug Collins has tied it up.
I've never seen anything grittier or guttier. I could not believe that he swished the 2 free throws.
But Doug Collins has perhaps won the game.
For a few seconds, he was the most glorious Olympic basketball athlete in American history, and would have lived on as that, if not for the atrocities committed on that court.
Somebody has gone down on the floor, and Bedlam has taken over here at the basketball hall.
The Russians brought the ball inbounds, and they played 2 seconds, and I think obviously would have played the third one, but the Russian coach was up from his bench signaling and saying that he wanted a timeout.
According to international rules, it was only the coach that could call the timeout before the first or before the second foul shot. Once the referee handed the ball to the foul shooter for the second foul shot, the ball was in play, and you could no longer call timeout.
When Collins executed the first free throw, I got up and started leaving towards my team, thinking that there would be a signal. There was no signal.
At that time, each coach had a buzzer. If he wanted a timeout, he buzzed it. And evidently one of the light bulbs wasn't pushed or didn't go off.
Kondrashin was a very experienced international coach and won a world championship, and I can't believe that he blew the timeout situation.
Before the second free throw left Doug Collins' hands, the horn clearly sounded.
The fact that we hear this sound going off would indicate that the scorer's table was aware that a mistake had been made and that there should be a timeout awarded to the Soviets.
At this point, R. William Jones, the Secretary General of the International Amateur Basketball Federation, comes down from the stands and does something that no man can do. Overrules the referees who are in control of the game.
You can see in the film, Mr. Jones has 3 fingers raised saying that there's 3 more seconds remaining in the game.
Mr. Jones, who was seated nearby, came. He saw everything, he heard everything, he understood Russian a little bit.
He doesn't have any jurisdiction over these games. He has no right to come down and tell the people at that table or the referees how to administer that game.
He was still the king of basketball. He wanted to see that there was no complaints from either side, and he never expected the Russians to win.
They're changing the clock is what they're doing. They're going back to 3 seconds.
The Russians again threw the ball inbounds and threw a long pass the other end of the floor, and then the horn sounded again, and that's when we contend that the game was over.
Wow, what a finish! The United States winning their 8th consecutive gold medal.
We thought we won. I have a picture of me hugging Tom McMillan, who is not one of my favorite people, but, you know, I'm so excited I'm hugging Tom.
Everybody celebrated. People started running off the court. We had come from behind. Everybody thought the game was over. And we felt we had won the gold medal.
There are another 3 seconds less.
Sometimes I wake up at night and I hear that 3 more seconds.
At first it was disbelief. You're standing there with our mouths open, shocked.
Wait a minute, the game is over. We've won this game. What's the major holdup? The problem with the situation is that, again, the referee inbounds the ball prematurely, in this case because the clock was reading 50 seconds and not 3 seconds.
They had to reset the clock, so they got a 3rd chance, and so the Americans thought that at every turn they had been cheated, when in fact they probably hadn't been, but they'll never acknowledge that.
We couldn't believe that they were giving him all these chances. It was like they were going to let him do it until they got it right.
I was making the argument, you can't put time back on the clock. Can't do it. We were ordered, go back on the floor or forfeit the gold medal. And Coach Iver had to make that decision. And there was talk, let's walk. Walk right to the dressing room. He said, no, we're not going to lose the gold medal sitting on our asses.
They didn't pay enough attention to the reality of the situation. And the reality was that they were going to be able to throw the ball in again. And we should have substituted, and we didn't.
The Soviets had inserted their designated inbounds passer, Ivan Edeshko, into the game. Iba chose not to use either defensive specialist, Bobby Jones, or his tallest player, 7'4" Tom Burleson, benched for the final because his fiancée had visited him in the Olympic dorm.
There wasn't a chance for any coaching. You had 2 referees who didn't speak the same language. You know, so they had no idea what was going on. It was total chaos.
The Russians were throwing the ball in after the 3 seconds had been granted. It appears as if the official was signaling to Tom McMillan, look, that you can't break this plane, this barrier. And for some reason, Tom felt like he was saying, you got to step back, you got to move back.
I was not required to get off the ball under international rules, but when someone's going like that, in the craziness of this game, the last thing you wanted was a technical foul, and so I went babackwards.
The 3rd time, the defender stepped back, and I saw I could throw the pass I wanted to throw. It was easy for me to throw the pass the way I wanted to throw.
There is time for the Russians to go to their big man, Alexander Belov. They're going to try. Alexander Belov between 2 American defenders.
I watched Belov hit Kevin Joyce and Jim Forbes with 2 elbows. He just hit them both, and they went flying.
The fact of the matter is, he caught it. There wasn't a major bump, just enough to knock me off balance, unfortunately, and he lays it in.
Americans, they were just standing there watching. It's their fault they lost, and I say they made their own mistakes. They did not disturb passing of the ball. They did not prevent Alexander Belov from receiving the ball.
And the Russian team has mobbed Alexander Belov.
And you're thinking the Russians win? Do they really win? Is the game over? And then it settles in. The Russians win, the game's over, the Americans are screaming.
There were some ticked off guys, I can tell you that. There were some pissed off basketball players.
Having lost a game for the first time since basketball became an Olympic event in 1936, and convinced of the righteousness of their cause, the Americans filed a formal protest with the International Amateur Basketball Federation.
You can't change the rules after the game is in progress, which is exactly what they had done by adding the 3 seconds.
Frank Gifford and I actually stayed in the arena until 4 o'clock in the morning with the Soviets, who stayed in uniform waiting to see if the decision would get overturned.
At a press conference on the afternoon following the game, the issue of what team would get the gold medal was resolved by a 5-member panel.
Everything progressed according to strictly Cold War politics. There's 3 communist bloc judges. It's a 3-2 vote. America loses. The Soviet Union wins the gold medal. At that point, the American players are facing a stark reality. Do they accept the silver medal?
We felt like they just did something to us that was illegal, and we didn't know any other way to protest that other than to say that you're not about to get us to show up to take that silver medal.
The Americans responded by boycotting the awards ceremony. The silver medals were stored in a vault in Lausanne, Switzerland. 3 decades later, they remain unclaimed.
It was monumental poor sportsmanship. You lost, accept your loss. You were partly responsible for the game winding up the way it did.
The American team was offended and it wasn't right. Then it was the Cold War. Americans, out of their own natural pride and love of country, they didn't want to lose and admit loss. They didn't want to lose in anything, especially basketball.
If we had gotten beat, I would be proud to display my silver medal today. But we didn't get beat, we got cheated.
I have placed it in my will that my wife and my children can never ever receive that medal from the 72 Olympic Games.
If there was something denied in my life, it was the gold medal in the 72 Olympics. It seemed like a dagger had been put in our hearts, and it hurt.
It's sort of like being on the Sears Tower in Chicago, celebrating, and somebody pushing you off, and just falling 100-something floors to the ground. That's the emptiness, the sick feeling that I felt.
Our misfortune was that we lost a basketball game. But we all got to return home and go back to college and go to our homes and see our families. Those Israelis, they never got that opportunity. They went home in boxes and caskets.
In February of 2002, in a letter to the president of the International Olympic Committee, Tom McMillan sought the gold medals that were denied him and his teammates. Among the precedents he cited was the dual gold medals received by the Canadian figure skating pair as a result of misconduct by the French judge at the 2002 Winter Games. 30 years cannot erase our team's disappointment, McMillan wrote. He later said recognition by the IOC that something wrong was done would be a big step towards healing the wounds. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.